Franchising seems to have been in the news a lot recently. We had the Senate inquiry taking up a lot of newspaper headlines. What's come of the Senate inquiry, Greg, in terms of the ACCC's task force? Where are we at with that?
Well, they appointed the task force last year, and then there was a regulatory impact statement released. There was a call for submissions. Those submissions closed off towards the very end of last year, and we're now sort of awaiting the outcome of and the recommendations going to government. Just very recently, there's been a release of some proposed amendments to the code specific to the motor vehicle industry, which is just sort of currently in play now and being reviewed by the various stakeholders.
It does always feel like the code's under review constantly, and we've had so many different changes to it over the years. I'm hoping, and what do you think about some of the more radical changes that came out of the Senate inquiry? Where do you think we'll end up with those?
I think we'd be foolish to believe that there's not going to be radical change to the code. It's largely been untouched, unchanged since 1998. I mean, it's been tweaked a little bit, but I think the attitude to date has been, well, if it's not broken, if we all understand how it works, then let's not mess with it too much. But I think the tone of the report last year was very much things are not okay, and there's some serious and some over the top and unworkable recommendations within that won't be put in place, but there will be significant change.
I mean, penalties are likely to be one of the big changes, I think. Introduction of penalties for code breaches. That'll be, obviously there are some provisions that have those already, but not all, so that'll be a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely be increased. I think the other thing that is likely to happen is the unfair contract term legislation will, I think, be made to automatically apply to franchise arrangements. I think that's one easy change.
Well, the whole area of unfair contract terms and unfair practices is going to be a big emphasis for the ACCC this year. They're going to be looking for some major changes to the law in that space. So the fact that it's automatically going to apply to franchising, I think, is going to have to drive some change in the sector.
Look, I think the reality is, you and I have both been doing this for a long time now. When we were drafting agreements back in the early 2000s, the agreements were drafted in a very, very one-sided manner. There's a lot of
deliberately.
Yeah, deliberately. But there's a lot of provisions in franchise agreements that you would never rely on. So I know we've taken the view here at Maddocks that when we draft agreements now, when we amend agreements, we're getting rid of a lot of those really onerous provisions that are never relied on anyway. And I think it's not going to be a bad thing if unfair contract terms do apply to franchise agreements. It will just make them simpler, and it will get rid of provisions that you never really rely on to terminate anyway. And
obviously, apart from its involvement with the task force, the ACCC has its ongoing role as the regulator and enforcer in this space. The ultra-churn decision was a very big decision for the Commission. I think some significant penalties, even though reduced down to appeal, I think from 2.6 to 2 million. But I mean, that case was surprising, I think.
I think we all looked at that case and were surprised and a bit shocked at the level of the penalties. Probably also shocked at the way the court interpreted the requirement to produce and disclose matters in advertising fund statements. They certainly went well beyond what the sort of basic reading of the requirements in the code are. And I think really, franchisors would be foolish not to go to school on that and have a good hard look at how they're preparing and disclosing their advertising spend. To be honest, I think there are a lot of franchisors out there who've probably been fudging that requirement a little bit, but the court's now come down and said very clearly what they think is required in terms of detail, and it's a lot more detail than franchisors are currently giving.
Yeah, the ACCC came out with its model marketing fund disclosure statement, and it had a significant level of detail in that at the time. And I remember everyone thinking, there's no way the code requires that level of disclosure, and yet looking at the judgment, it's pretty clear that it does. So, I mean, businesses are going to have to grapple with that and get up to speed with that. Otherwise, there's risk of ongoing prosecution by the ACCC. And as you said, that 2.6 million reduced to 2 million on appeal that's a pretty good incentive to get it right. And what are we going to see for the rest of the year, do you think? Are there going to be, there's going to be more litigation?
What we're going to see is a response to the inquiry. So there's going to be some recommendations this year for legislative change. We've already seen some of them with the recommendations to change the code for the motor vehicle sector. So we're going to see that. Franchisors are going to have to start thinking about preparing for that change. Will there be more litigation by the ACCC? I think absolutely. I mean, I think one of the problems that the ACCC has is that they're not successful that often, and they've tasted some good success in the last 12 months. And ultra-churn's a good example, because that's a situation where ultra-churn's behaviour wasn't really at the high end of egregious behaviour. It was failure to disclose in advertising funds. You look at the geowash case, for example, and that's just a high-level egregious behaviour. You go back to some of the successful actions in relation to unconscionable conduct in the Simply No Need case, which was many years ago now, but all really just absolute terrible behaviour by franchisors. So easy wins for the ACCC when they take those on. I don't think the ultra-churn case was in that category, and they've had success. So I think they're going to, in my view, do more audits of franchisors and their documents, and I think they will take action.
Well, they had that significant review of a number of the retail food franchise systems last year, and they weren't happy with the level of disclosure and the level of code compliance in that sector. And the way the ACCC operates, as you know, is that they do an investigation, they release a report, they try and drive changes in a sector through that investigation and reporting focus. And if they don't see the change that they like, then litigation follows.
And you and I have both been proponents that really less need for legislative change, more resources to the ACCC to enforce the current laws that they're there, because they've got a lot of teeth, but they need more resources to throw at this.
Yeah, I think that's right.